Hello, friends. How are we? Nice to see y'all. Thanks so much for joining.
It's going to be a nice small group tonight, guys. You guys are basically getting like individual coaching from me and Meggie.
We love we love that for you. So feel free to keep your camera on if you want or not. That's totally fine too. But given that we have such a great small group, why don't you let us know in the chat a little bit about your situation right now, what's going on for you, so that we can kind of tailor the conversation to really support what's going on for you right now. We've got a half hour together tonight. We're going to keep it short and snappy because we know that your time is precious. But Chloe, I'll let you introduce yourself and then I'll do an official intro and then we can jump in.
Yeah, for sure. So Brittany is actually one of my students, so I know Brittany. But it's nice to see you guys. I'm obviously Chloe from CloBare Money Coach, and Meggie and I just wanted to hop on tonight to really talk about salary negotiation because she's at PepTalkHer, and their whole thing is bringing up that gender wage gap so that it is not a thing anymore. And you guys know, if you follow me, I am a very, very big advocate for asking for more money. It's one of the ways that I was able to do everything that I was able to do in, the last couple of years by taking my salary up significantly in that time period. So I love talking about salary negotiations. So I'm excited to talk to you guys about it tonight.
Likewise, likewise. And listen, my name is Meggie Palmer, for those of you who I haven't met. I'm the founder of a company called PepTalkHer. And the gender pay gap pisses me off. I got paid less. I used to be a foreign correspondent, a journalist. The dudes who sat at the cubicles next to me, reporting next to me, got paid heaps more. So I thought that I should say something to the bosses because I thought they would be shocked. Turns out they knew all about it. And they told me that I should quit or take them to court if I didn't like the situation. So began my journey of kind of understanding the unconscious bias and the pay gap that kind of impacts a lot of us. So we know that the gender pay gap's around 20%-ish in the developed world, depending on how you kind of crunch the numbers. But to Chloe's point, yeah, it's like if you can get paid more money, like I think my first salary, I was on 28K. And I managed to triple it in 3 years, but like there's a heap of strategy that goes into that, as you know, Chloe, like because otherwise you just kind of get stuck with maybe 2 or 3% a year if you're lucky to keep up with inflation.
Yeah, for sure.
So, welcome. Why don't y'all let us know where you're joining from today? I am in downtown New York City. But I am Australian, hence my accent. And what we want to chat to you about today is like specifically like how can you get more money in terms of your salary? What does that look like? What do you do if they say no, right? And how do you go about preparing for that conversation? Hey, from Denver, Colorado. I've never been to Denver. Always wanted to go. Have to put it on my list. So Chloe, what was like the key thing that you did when you were negotiating for a higher salary? What was like the most important thing that you did ahead of time to kind of prep for that?
So the most important thing by far is that I made it really known that I was trying to grow at the company so that the first time I was talking to my boss about, increasing my salary was not happening in that like annual review. It was like happening all year round. It was like, hey, I'm going for this senior manager position. Like we're going to make it happen. Tell me the things that I need to do in order to make that happen. I see these issues. Let me solve these problems. So it was like, it was not going to be a surprise when I came to that conversation and was like, hey, I'm ready. Here's everything that I've done. But the second most
Right.
important thing, and like probably the most important thing I did, is I tracked all of my successes. And like that's a huge one. And I'm always surprised by how
Yeah.
often people don't do that. And it's like you have to track every time you do something amazing, every time you're doing work outside of your scope, save every time somebody says how nice it is to work with you. Like the tracking, it's like collecting your data to come to the conversation and be like, here are all the reasons why, I deserve XYZ.
And it's funny you said that. And we didn't even prepare this ahead of time. But it's funny you say that because one of the reasons we built the Pep Talker app, which is totally free by the way, is because of that exact reason. Like we know that if you walk into a pay raise conversation with hard data and with like dollars and cents and statistics and feedback from the executive or managers or colleagues above and below you in the org to kind of back up and advocate for why you deserve it, it shifts the conversation because it's less about you saying, please, may I have a pay raise? And it's more about, hey, look at this, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, like I'm amazing, boom, boom, boom. And then, given that, I'd love to discuss my compensation going forward. what could that look like, given the seniority of my role and the value that I've been contributing? So it kind of shifts the power a little bit. Instead of you just asking with nothing to kind of back it up, you then have some meat on the bone almost, right, Chloe?
Yeah, for sure. Exactly. It's a much easier yes when you come to the table with data than if you are just asking to ask.
100%. So let us know in the chat if there's anything that you're kind of struggling with right now, or if you have got a raise coming up soon that you want us to address in particular. Chloe, what do you when you went in with the data that you were tracking? How was that received compared to maybe previous raise conversations where you hadn't kind of had those successes already tracked?
Generally, I mean, I didn't always get a yes, but most of the time I did get a yes because it was kind of like the conversation just became like the formalized part where it was like we were working towards that for such a long time that by the time that the actual conversation happened, it was just kind of like a here's the official notice like of your new job title and thing like that. But because I worked so hand in hand with my boss in terms of like talking about how I wanted to grow in the company and talking about like what my next steps were and making sure I was reaching those goals. By the time I came to those
Yeah.
conversations, it was like we had already had that conversation multiple times. I had already like written my job description. I had already done the things that led me to it. So like the conversation was just like to formalize everything. So I will say like that is all dependent on having a really good boss, but having a really good boss doesn't happen by chance. You've got to be interviewing these companies as well. So like when you're interviewing specifically for a new job, and like granted, you guys may be trying to get, raises within your current companies, but when you are looking for a new position,
Yeah.
making sure that you're really interviewing the person who you are going to be working under is so important, because if you are in an environment where they do not value you, they don't value your growth, they don't think that's important, that's going to hinder the rest of your career at that company. So that was huge for me. And it's funny, anytime I talk about this, people are like, you got it lucky because you had a good boss. And I'm like, no, that was by design.
Yeah, and the harder my nana used to always say, the harder you work, the luckier you get. And I appreciate that there's definitely some privilege involved with all of these conversations. I think if you back yourself in the first instance, and if like Chloe, you're like, damn, like I'm good at my job and here's the reasons why. If you have that self-confidence, it means that honestly, people are gonna take you more seriously. Like I'm not saying that's fair or right or reasonable, but that's just the reality of human nature, right? And if you can if you can truly believe the value that you're bringing to the business, if you've got all those wins tracked in the app, and if you kind of look at them regularly, you can be like, actually, I forgot about that. Oh, yeah, I did get us a feature in Vogue. Or, oh, yeah, I did improve our SEO by 5%. If you can track those things, it's going to give you more confidence so that when you walk in, you're going to be less freaking out, a little bit less, and just
Yeah.
way more confident, right? Because I always say like these things, it's like a muscle. Like if I wanted massive biceps, like which I do not have, but if I did this for 2 days, dumbbells, like nothing would happen. But if I do this every day for like a year or two, maybe I'll get more and more like Arnie Schwarzenegger, like pump those muscles. And it's the same when you think about your mindset approaching these conversations. And that's why I like snaps to all of you who are here, because, you're taking time, which is very precious, to actively consider these things, right? And to make it a priority. And in doing that, it's our hope that you'll certainly be able to negotiate a heap more cash. Very here for. We've got a great question coming in, Chloe, specifically about how do you advocate for a raise at promo time when you were onboarded with compensation and kind of the agreement that this role was going to evolve. So how do you then say, well, actually, it's evolved a little further? Have you ever encountered this in your career, Chloe?
So basically, it sounds like you were onboarded and then the job is evolving, but you knew at the time when you took it that it was going to keep changing. That. Is that what you're saying, Brittany?
Yes, that's exactly it.
Okay. So when you got hired on, did you talk to them about future opportunities for more compensation and new job titles?
I didn't.
Okay. So I would honestly, so do you have like scheduled one-to-ones with your manager?
I do every week.
Okay, sweet. So in one of these one-to-ones, give them a heads up and say like, hey, remember when I was onboarded and I started this position, we had talked about how this is an ever-evolving role. Now that I've got 2 months under my belt, I've really got a better idea of where I think this is going. And I would love to start tracking and talking about how I can get to, whatever position it is you want to get to, because I want to make sure that in 6 months or a year, when we're having this conversation, it's going to be a very easy transition into this next role. So kind of like, you've talked about this with them, but like now it's like you're only 2 months in. So it's like, okay, I have an idea of what I'm actually doing now. And now I have an idea of how this company works. Now I have an idea of what this role could evolve to. Does that make sense?
It does. The only thing, my role is it's also unique in the sense that me and my manager are like a 2-person team.
Mhm.
So we're on the benefits team, but we specifically work with retirement plans.
Mhm.
So I don't really have any comparisons really to go off of where the role could be or what it should be. So what would you recommend in that kind of sense?
I mean, I think as well. I don't know about you, Chloe, but I think like if the role is vastly different, Brittany, like if it's way more senior, way more hours, and crazy more senior than you had expected, then like you're within your rights, I think, to have a conversation straight away. If it's like a little bit different, but like you're only 2 months in, I think it's tough to negotiate after only 2 months. Typically, I would say you want to at least get through your probation period of 90 days. Typically, there are exceptions to the rule, but it would be pretty rare that I would be recommending to anyone to negotiate in less than 6 to 12 months. There are exceptions to every rule, but I think it depends on the conversation you have with the recruiter and the expectations at the beginning. But keep that in mind, because you don't want to damage with negotiation, you want to play a long game. Yes, you want to maximize your comp, but you also don't want to damage your relationships in the short term such that it actually, impacts your working relationships. So if you've got any more detail, feel free to pop that in the chat so we can contextualize that for you. But Chloe, I love the H1B visa website. Do you use that? I think that's amazing. I'll pop it in the chat for everyone.
No. But yeah, no, I would say I agree with what Meggie said. Is I wouldn't start the conversation of compensation right now, but I wouldn't say it's too early to talk about your future in the career or at that company. Would you say it was, Meggie?
No, you're quite right. In terms of 100%, in terms of laying the expectations, being like, wow, this role is more full on than I was expecting. I'm really proud that I'm handling it so well. We've had some great wins, but just to be clear, this is a lot. So I'd love to revisit, the title and the comp in maybe a couple of months, but let me keep plowing through and getting you those results. Like, you want to frame it in the positive, but to Chloe's point, like setting an expectation that like, whoa, like hold your horses. This is a lot. And you might even want to, like kind of caveat that with an email prior to the meeting, just so that you've got something in writing. Doesn't have to be formal or legalistic, but just to say, hey, I'm really excited for our one-on-one. I'd love to chat to you about the workload. I'm coping, but it's a lot, and I'm looking forward to kind of getting any feedback that you can give me. Just putting it on record, just again, to Chloe's point, like alerting people that I've got this, but it's a lot, so that then it's not out of the blue in 3, 6, 9 months when you are asking for more money.
Or even like identifying, like, here are some of the issues that I'm seeing in our, and how we're doing things. And here are some of the solutions I'd like to propose, kind of like, identifying something that needs to change and being the key person who's going to make that change. It looks like Maggie froze. Oh no, okay, she's back. But you had asked, like, how do I see, how do I even know what that next position is? Take a look at other companies that may have larger teams. Maybe I'm not sure what size of the company you've got or what industry in. Oops, sorry. But maybe even getting some like informational interviews where you message somebody on LinkedIn who you've got a mutual connection with and saying like, hey, I really love what you're doing and I'd love to hear more about your position. Would you mind like hopping on a phone for like 15 minutes? I'd just love to ask you some questions. What I have found is like people love, number one, talking about themselves, and number two, they love helping other people in their career path. So like maybe kind of do some LinkedIn sleuthing to get an idea of like, what are other people doing in other, other industries, other, HR teams or whatever, to really just better understand the industry you are in.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds great.
And I just popped a link as well, which is helpful for you, Brittany, and hopefully for everyone. I would save that link. It's like the unsung hero of salary data. There's all the usual suspects. You are all super bright people. You know about salary.com. You know about Glassdoor, right? You can Google all of those things. The thing is, sometimes you'll be like, what's a marketing associate paid on Glassdoor? And they'll be like, $40,000 to $440,000. And you're like, well, not helpful.
Right.
So this website is super cool. So basically any company in America that wants to hire a foreign worker or someone who needs a visa has to publicly report what they are paying them. So I'm talking all of the big companies and smaller companies too, law firms, consulting firms, the Googles of the world, they're all on there. You can search by title like executive assistant, developer, copywriter. You can search by everything. And keep in mind, sometimes people that need a visa have a little less leverage when they're negotiating because they kind of want to stay in the States, so they might need a visa or a green card. So sometimes these salaries are actually at the lower end of the range, but it's really cool because it's up to date, and it's typically less than a year old, so it's pretty current. And you know that it's vetted and it's actually legitimate. So it's really, really helpful to kind of give you a baseline. And to Chloe's point, like whenever you're going into these conversations, if you want a $200 raise, you're good. You don't need us, you'll be fine. But if you're talking $2,000, 5,000, 10, 20K in the Pep Talker community getting 50, 60K raises even during COVID. If that's what you want, then like you got to put in to Chloe, to use Chloe's word. And it's one of the things we say too, is like you got to do some sleuth time. Like you got to be like fully like getting in there, like pretending you're a detective, doing all this kind of groundwork ahead of the conversation. Right? You've got to have your numbers ready to go. You've got to understand the context of the business, your value to the business, and frankly, your value in market. And truly, there's never been a better time to be looking for a job. Like, and Chloe, I know you know this from the industry, like as well, like it is an employee's market because companies cannot hire quickly enough because of the great resignation. Everyone's like mixing it up, right? So companies are desperate to hire. And the other thing that I think is important for everyone to remember is like right now, inflation, what are they saying? It's 7.5% today. So if you're not getting, 7 to 10% this year, you're sliding back. And that's not cool. Because, as you know, all the stuff that CloBare does, like if you're literally sliding backwards, then that's less money for you to invest, which is less money compounding for you into the future. So I want you to ask for a raise every single year, especially this year. Like, I really, really want you all to do that. It's kind of urgent.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with that. Oh, I think we're freezing again.
I don't know if there's any specific. Oh, is it going weird? Sorry.
That's for some reason, every once in a while you're freezing, but we're powering through, man.
We are powering through. Good on you, New York internet. Thanks for coming. Sorry about that, everyone. So one of the other things, Chloe, that I wanted to chat about is preparation. So not sexy, to be fair, but one of the most powerful tools that I see people implement is practicing these negotiation conversations ahead of time. Did you do that when you got your massive bumps?
Oh yeah, I actually had my friends pretend to be like the people that I was interviewing with, and this was like specifically for like a new job. I don't think I did it as much when it was just like a new job in the company, but it was like when I was going to a new company, I would have my friends like devil's advocate, and I picked a couple of friends. I was just like, all right, I want you to interview me and I want you to give me feedback, but I want to like, the whole thing was I wanted to be able to catch questions I wasn't prepared for. And like, it's just like we said, it's a muscle. It's the same thing with really anything, like when I first started doing Instagram content creation, I never wanted to go live. I never wanted to show my face on a story, but like, I just forced myself to do it over and over again. And now I do it all of the time. It's the same with interviewing, the more practice you get. That's why, especially when you're looking for a job, it's generally a good idea. And I don't know what you think about this, Meggie, but I think it's a really good idea to take the calls. Yeah. Like, even if you're not necessarily interested in a position, taking a call, if you have the time to do it, just to practice your interview skills is incredibly helpful, just to get you even more confident than what you may have been.
Yeah, exactly. And so even if like I have recruiters that reach out to me, I run PepTalkHer, I'm very happy in the business, etc., managing my team, but I have recruiters that reach out to me and I will always take their calls. Just because why wouldn't I? Like, let's see what they have to say. And often I use it as an opportunity, Chloe, to throw out some pretty crazy numbers. So they'll be like, "Oh, what would it take for you to come and, run this podcasting company or whatever?" And I'll be like, "Well, listen, like the business is going really well, blah, blah, blah. This is the sort of salary that I would need." Like, I just put out ridiculous numbers because I don't care and I don't want the job. So I just use it as, again, a brain training exercise, coming back to that kind of bicep concept of like, YOLO, why wouldn't I just chuck it out there and see? And sometimes the recruiter's like, I know, I told them they needed a bigger budget. It's not quite that much, but it's close. And I said to them they'd need more money than that. And I'm like, okay, interesting. So you're telling me if I did want this job, maybe not quite that crazy figure, but maybe close. All right, well, that's cool for me to know, like, because that's, again, real world, up-to-date intel. So, we don't want to be in the business of wasting anyone's time, etc. Your reputation is very important. However, jumping on a 10-minute call is like no skin off anyone's nose. So I really recommend it. And one of the things you can all do, and Chloe talks about this too, right, is like you can chat to a recruiter and you should be doing that once a year, at least. Because the market changes. Like if you're a data analyst or a data scientist, like what you can command for a job the last couple of years has just skyrocketed, right? Because there's not enough demand in market. So if that's your skill set, then you're in luck, So again, recruiters have up-to-date intel as to what companies are paying, what sort of sign-on bonus you can expect. Because that's the other thing, Chloe, I feel like a lot of people, we talk about salary and cash, which is cool. Equity, great. Bonus, great. But there's other things too, right? It's not just the money.
Yeah, absolutely. There's equity, there's time off, there's flexibility in where you work. Like there are just so many things that I think people don't think about. So it's like, even if they say no on the salary that you want, you can always see what other flexibility they've got if you really want the position.
Yeah, and one of the things that I used to negotiate for a heap back when I was a journalist was extra paid time off. Mm-hmm. So like an extra couple of weeks year to go on vacation. It kind of didn't cost them anything in terms of a budget line, but it was really valuable to me because I could do more travel, which is kind of cool, right? So thinking about that, I've negotiated back when I was at college finishing my degrees. I negotiated to do a 4.5-day week so that I could go to lectures. In theory, I used to just drink and be hungover, but in theory I was at class. Let's not tell my former boss that. But you can like I've had people who've negotiated to say, I want to start at 11 on a Wednesday in perpetuity because I go and visit my grandma every Wednesday morning. And that actually brings joy to my life to have that flexibility. So don't be afraid to have that conversation. They might say no. They might be like, oh, that's kind of an unusual request, but actually, yeah, as long as you're around for the team meeting, I don't care if you start at 11 on a Wednesday. Some of my clients get their pet insurance paid for by their company. So there's lots of random benefits. Like sometimes people get higher 401k contributions, especially as you get, more mature in your career. I hear a lot. They can't get any more salary, but companies are willing to top up their 401k more, which is kind of cool.
Which is huge. I mean, that can make a huge difference in your long-term investing goals as well.
Yeah, 100%. So I think, one of the things again is your I knocked the mute button. One of the things that's important is for you to kind of do some of that mental gymnastics work ahead of time. And so I think it's very easy for all of us to complain about the pay gap because it is shit and it does totally suck. And it's easy for us to complain about shitty bosses and toxic workplaces. I've been there, they're the worst and they really impact your mental health. And so shout out to if that's you and if you're going through that right now. Equally, I want to remind you tonight that like you have the capacity to have conversations to make that situation better. We can do things to kind of get you in a situation where you have a plan B so you can leave, right? And we want to make sure that you've got those options in place so that you can leave if you have to before you have some of these more challenging conversations, right? But don't be afraid to steer the career where you want it to go. They don't have all the power. It's cool that they're your boss and they're your employer. That's awesome. We respect that. Equally, you have power too. And to Chloe's point, like you contribute. If you were rubbish at your job, they would fire you. If you've not been fired, you're probably pretty good, and so if you're pretty good, they probably, hopefully, want to keep you. And often it's cheaper for them to give you a 5K bonus or a raise than it is to recruit someone. Because recruiting, what do you reckon, Chloe, like 15, 30K to recruit someone?
Yeah, I think I saw an average of high, and it depends on like the level of an employee, but it can cost anywhere between 30 and 60K to hire somebody, as well as like train them and take all of that time. So that's huge. I always think about that. There were a couple times when I worked at the consulting firm that I worked at where like somebody above me would leave and I would absorb their job. So I'd be like, listen, if you were trying to hire somebody new, not only would it cost you, $30,000 to find somebody, but it's also going to probably cost you an even higher salary in order to hire them, like somebody fresh out who's looking for this position and maybe like, higher up or whatever. But for me, really, it could be a bargain. And I don't word it in that way, but, really, taking that moment to recognize the position you're in and the fact that you do have, especially in that kind of scenario, you have the expertise, you have the experience of working with the clients or working within the industry that you're in. So sometimes it's hard to recognize that, but like understanding the full value you bring. One of the things my old mentor used to tell me is like, you can price yourself like a house, like in those situations. You don't just have, XYZ skill. Maybe, so like, for example, maybe you're a communications consultant, but you also have skills in project management and you also have skills in, negotiations and sales and like all of these things. Those add to your value as an employee, even though you may not see the direct connection, but price yourself like a house. Remember that those apply in other ways, especially if they're soft skills.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, it's important to remember that people pay the price that you put on yourself, right? So you want to make sure that the price tag you're putting on your head is decent and in fact amazing, because you're amazing too, right? Again, if you weren't, you would be fired. If you weren't doing a great job. That's the reality of capitalist America, right? And so if that's not the case, fingers crossed, no one got fired today, you're doing a great job, right? And you deserve to be compensated for that. So if you've got any questions, let us know in the chat. But we're running a free career challenge as well that's coming up. So you can feel free to join that if you're kind of really looking to focus on understanding your true value and how to advocate for yourself. So it's just peptalkher.com/Chloe, CLO. We would love to see you there. But Chloe, any final words of wisdom for everyone looking to be a total legend negotiating their salary this year?
I just want to like hear what you guys are experiencing, honestly, because like I feel like the most value we can give you is like tell us what you're going through, see, get our opinion on stuff. You guys have this time and like we charge a premium for our time. So like tell us more about you guys in the chat before we close out. See if we can
for sure
give you
jump
any
off
tips.
if you want. Jump off mute and just kind of hit us with the situation or pop it in the chat and we will come back to you. I think for someone like Brittany who's kind of trying to get a sense of what that range is in market, you got to talk to people. Yes, you can do Dr. Google, you can talk to recruiters, etc. But I want you chatting about money. I want you to chat about money with your BFF, with your cousins, with your sister. Like start to normalize talking about money. And I also want to make sure you're talking to at least one white dude about cash, because we know from the gender pay gap, likely they are earning more and have higher expectations, because we know that the pay gap sadly impacts women and women of color, especially to a much higher degree, which again, totally sucks. The UN reckons we're looking at 100 years till we get rid of that. So in the meantime, unfortunately, we've got to kind of do this extra groundwork to kind of make up some of that delta. So make sure you're talking to blokes about what their expectations are.
I love that. I had never even thought of that, but that is so simple and so like accurate. And they're going to have some good data. And again, people love talking about themselves. So do not feel like a burden. Like the worst thing that happens is they ignore you or they say no, and that's okay too.
And I feel like as well, like let's say you're talking to like, I don't know, one of your mates from college or something like Chad, you could, instead of being like, Chad, how much do you earn? I always couch it in terms of a range. I'd be like, hey Chad, so I'm going for this new job. It's like a marketing director. I was thinking like 80 to 100K. Does that feel kind of about right to you given the industry? And then that way Chad can be like, no girl, go for 130. Or they can be like, listen, I never got more than 90 at that company. So like, good luck. You know, it kind of gives them a bit of wriggle room, because some people are still weird about it, but other people will be like, you need to ask for 117K plus a 12K sign on. Like some people are very generous. You'd be surprised. I'm often shocked. People tell you a lot, right? If you ask.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because I think most people, you know, do want to help other people at the end of the day. So especially in the career industry where, you know, especially if you're not like, hey, I'm trying to steal your job, or I'm trying to, you know, whatever, like, what do they have to lose? They're, you know, rising tides lift all boats. So, all right, you guys are a quiet bunch.
I know, it's so nice to meet everyone. We're so grateful for your time, and we're going to circulate a replay for y'all as well, so you can watch this back if this is helpful. I'm going to chuck another free resource for you in the chat too. Make sure you check out, I'm sure you're already following Chloe on Instagram, but if you're not, make sure you check out her page. It's ridiculous. She has me in stitches every single day with her lol dance moves. It kills me. But we have a free cheat sheet that's helpful. I'll put that in the chat for you too. If you've got other questions, you know, we're on Instagram, so you can DM us and just let us know, you know, what you learned today, what you're going through. We are excited. Quick question that's coming through from Kim. Woohoo! So if they reckon they don't have a cell, if you've done a heap of research, and depends how much you want the job, but I will often use language like, hey, listen, I'm very well compensated where I am right now. Given the seniority of this role, I'd love to understand what you've budgeted, so that I can make an informed decision. So kind of, you're trying to position yourself as a legend, but you don't want to give too much away. What would you do in this situation?
Well, I think they were asking, so if they go and they say, hey, what is your range? What's your budget for this? They're saying, we don't have a budget for it. What do you do in that scenario? In that scenario, you know, one of the things I would maybe consider saying is, you know, it depends on where you're at in the interview process too, but like, especially if it's in the early interview process, I would maybe say, I'm still really learning at the scope of what this entails. So, you know, I'm not necessarily ready to settle on a range yet. It's kind of what I'm thinking. But I guess it really depends on the vibe. Like if somebody were to tell me we don't have a salary range and they really wanted me to give a number, I'd probably go pretty high based off of my research, because I don't want to talk myself out of, you know, like if I said, oh, I think I'll take, you know, $90,000 and their actual budget. I mean, they always have a range. They always have a budget. If they tell you they don't have a salary range, number one, red flag in your mind, because they're obviously lying. So I would say maybe consider whether or not you actually want to work for that company. But, you know, at the end of the day, they're always going to have a salary range, but we're going with the assumption that you've already done your research. So you've already got an idea in your head of what you think the range should be. And if they're not telling you a range, I would go on the higher end of that range that they are requesting from you. I don't know, Maggie, what you think about that.
Yeah, and you can always give a range as well, and you can make it pretty broad. It depends on how senior you are, but you know, sometimes my clients will say things like, if they really pushed you to give a number, they'll say, listen, we can get into the specifics later, but honestly, it's going to have to be well north of 100,000, or like we're talking well into the six figures. So like six figures could be 105, it could be 195, it could be 220, who knows? So sometimes you want to, it's a bit of a dance. In other instances, you might be saying, listen, I'm looking for something in the 120 to 150 mark, something like that, you know? And then you say, I just need to understand better about the KPIs. How many people am I managing? One of the things you can do is just keep asking questions. If you're not ready to give a number, say, tell me a little bit more about how many people would I be managing? How much is the budget, like for my advertising budget that I would be executing on? Would I be required to report to the board in this role? Would I be attending executive team meetings? Would I be doing global travel as part of this role? Like you're gonna try to like, do they actually want for this role, and how senior is it, you know? And some of those things will give you clues as well, Kim. So pleasure to meet you, Brittany. Thanks so much to everyone for coming. If you've got any other questions, hit us up on Instagram. We are on there. Check out Chloe's epic content, because as I said, it cracks me up every day. You're the best. Thanks so much, Chloe. This has been fun.
Yeah, for sure. I hope you guys learn at least something new. And yeah, if you ever have questions about salary negotiation, you know where to find us.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.